First off, my name's Carol. I am a physical therapist and a sports performance coach out of Cleveland, Ohio, here with CLE Sports PT and Performance. I just want to thank you all for taking the time to log in today. I really appreciate it. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while, getting together other coaches for interaction and idea sharing and learning. So I, again, really appreciate this. I'd love for this to be as interactive and as discussion based as possible. So if you have anything you'd like to chime in with, feel free to just unmute yourself and feel free to, say whatever you would like to say, or you can use the chat box as well. So a couple things coming up. So this is going to be a webinar series. So I'm doing this both for sport and sports performance coaches every other Thursday. And then on the alternating Tuesdays, there are going to be presentations for athletes and parents of athletes as well. Next up on Tuesday for one of the athlete presentations, we have What the Pros Know, How Data Can Help You Perform Better. And for sport and sports performance coaches, the next one will be on the 21st, and that will be on strength versus explosiveness. Let me see if I can change one of the settings on here. I guess that's not going to work, but that's okay. All right. For updates, feel free to stay up to date on my website, clesportspt.com. On Instagram, you can follow me on there, or on Twitter. All right. So what's the ultimate goal here? When we are talking about sports performance training, we're trying to build whatever athlete, so blank athlete's capacity to do blank. We're thinking about, so are we trying to get somebody faster so that they can get to the ball quicker, so that they can beat their opponent? Are we trying to get someone to have more stamina? I was just listening to a podcast with a few sports performance specialists in the UK that work with soccer, and they're talking about how the speed of the game is changing, and how the Manchester City high pressing defense, you have to build the endurance capacity for those guys to be able to play that high pressing, powerful formation. So we need to build whatever capacity. And when we think about that, there's a researcher that has written a lot of papers talking about going from the floor to the ceiling. And I love that quote because I think it really makes sense with everything. So the floor is the athlete's current physical ability, or what we call their capacity. And the ceiling is that's actually a typo. The ceiling is what we need to get them to. So disregard what that says. Ceiling should be athletes, what their potential, what we need to get them to. The challenge is the time needed to get there. So if we don't have enough time to get them to where they need to be at that level that they need to perform, we risk burnout, because we may have to train them very hard, very fast, and they could burn out. We could see a performance decrease because at a certain point, you're kind of maxed out on what you're able to do. You're not recovering well day to day. And then also we have an increase in injury risk. So how do we bridge that gap? There's a couple ways. The first one starts with making a very realistic and objective plan. And that's kind of the first place where data is going to start to come into play. What kind of load is needed? And we're going to go into the definition of what that means in a couple minutes. But what type of load is needed? And then how do we manage that? So do they need sprinting load? Do we need plyometric training? Do we need more strength training? The person needs to get stronger. And how do we manage that? Do we, how do we ramp it up? How do we dose it out? All of those things. All of those things start with something called a needs analysis. For example, if I am working with soccer players, I need to know, obviously they need to be playing for 90 minutes. I need to look at the position that athlete is playing. If they're playing midfield, they need to get from one end of the field to the other, how many times a game. The sports performance specialists that I was just listening to were so easily able to rattle off stats of how many accelerations and decelerations that their athletes need to get in a game, and how that's actually increasing, and the level of speed that they need to accelerate to is increasing. So these are things that we need to know, we need data on. From there, we can work backwards, and that's where we have to account for time. We have to account for other demands. We need baseline testing to see where that athlete is, where is their floor, and then again, where the ceiling is that they need to get to. And it needs to be realistic. Like, for example, I work at a high school. We just had spring break, and half of our student body went on trips. So we are kind of starting not from square one with our spring athletes, but knowing that they've had a week off, and some of them worked out over that week with the plans that we gave them. Some of them did not. Some of them got stuck in coming back from Mexico and missed the practice on Monday leading up to the Tuesday game. These are things that, maybe we need to account for a spring break coming up, and that those things are probably going to happen. This is where your realistic plan needs to come into place. When I work with runners that are marathon training, I need to understand, they might have a couple 5Ks, they're training for a marathon, but they might have a couple 5Ks with their friends that they want to run in. So maybe that's going to affect their training for a certain week. All of these things need to be planned out and accounted for. You need to adjust because things happen, but the more you can control in the beginning, the better. So what else can data do? First thing is, data can give objective reports on the athlete's capacity, so their ability. It can be objective. So versus, I think that person is a little slow. No, how slow are they? How many seconds are they running this? How many times are they not able to get to the ball? We can see that. And then we can track changes, because obviously if we're trying to build capacity, if we're trying to build an athlete's ability to get better, stronger, faster, all those things, we can track changes over that time period. Across training sessions, throughout a season, from one season to another. All of these things are really important to show if somebody's making progress or not, and to know what to do about it. Data can inform coaches on the demands of a game. It can inform the medical staff on the demands of a game. When I'm a physical therapist, and so part of what I do is rehabbing somebody to get them back onto the field. I need to know what I'm bringing my person back into, and sometimes it's a limited, minutes situation. Sometimes it's, if I have a player that is playing defense and I know that the game is going to be maybe a one-sided game one way or another, maybe that's not the game I'm going to throw them back into. Data can help me figure all of those things out. It can assist the coach with having to plan out drills and training for that given day. Maybe the players are too fatigued. Maybe we shouldn't be going with the same training plan that we had because people's legs just aren't back from playing a game the day before. The other thing is, along those same lines, it can track fatigue. And if somebody's not recovering and they're not meeting the metrics that they should be in performance, we want to know as soon as possible so that we can make adjustments and change before it's too late, before they get injured, before they get burnt out. So I mentioned load, and this is where I'll maybe give a little more detail about that. Load is the total amount of, it's physical, but it's also physiological stress that's on the athlete. So this is on everything that athlete faces during the day. There is training load, that is the load from whatever they've done in a workout, whatever they've done competition wise, but then there's other load, life load, I like to call it. There's school load, there's work, there's life stress. There's, when one of my athletes told me that she was up all night writing a paper and then came in to do a really tough track workout and then had to go home to study and do another paper. Again, that's somebody who's up on lack of sleep and just had a huge training load, but just had a huge school load as well. And so there's a big effect on training load there. Load management is the proper balance of load and recovery. So it's kind of a buzzword right now. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, or maybe some of you use it. It's basically, we want to load somebody to get them better. They need an adequate load to be able to take them to the next level, but then we need a recovery period too. And how do we manage that? Because that's different for everybody. Some people can take a lot of load and can recover very quickly for whatever reason. These are either their body physiologically, either they are really dialed in on their nutrition and recovery methods. Maybe they're not facing a lot of stress in their life at a certain point of time. All of that matters. Some people need a little bit more time, and you may have within a team people that are on one side of the spectrum and then the other. So load management is about getting what's best for your players and knowing how to, one, train them to be their best, but then also when they need to recover to let those training effects set in. So a few things that go along with that. One is, volume, intensity, high intensity versus low intensity. When you are doing too much too soon, that gives you increased risk of injury. But at the same time, if you're gradually increasing somebody's workload, you're gradually building up that capacity, they're gradually building from the floor up to the ceiling, that actually has been shown by research to reduce injury risk. Again, what's feasible here? If I only have 3 weeks to get an athlete ready, their load is going to be very high, and we have to be very realistic because we don't want to risk injury. But if you have the time to do and you can do this properly, they're going to be better off in the long run. So if we have the time to get them ready, get them faster, stronger, whatever we need to do, that in the long run is, research shows more often than not that actually reduces your injury risk. How do we monitor how they're doing with those things? Use data. If they're not hitting the right targets at what point they need to, that's when we need to ramp up the data. If they're too fatigued, if they're burnt out, if they're hurt, then we ramp down. It's normally fatigued after a really tough workout, a tough training session, tough game, whatever it is. But are they being fatigued? Are they burnout? Is this stretching into a couple weeks? At that point, then we need to ramp something down. There's two types of load, and these are two different things that we can measure. There's external load, and then there's internal load. The training load that I mentioned earlier is a product of the internal and external loads. Now, external load is what we call the work or the volume. This is pretty easy to quantify. This is distance bike, distance run, distance swam, the amount of weight lifted. So it's really easy to say if I have an athlete doing, 5 sets of 5 squats, I can, calculate their load by the amount of pounds that they've lifted, and then just track that week to week to make sure that there's no spikes. Now GPS data is able to show us in team sports like basketball, football, soccer, lacrosse, the number of sprints, the number of accelerations and decelerations somebody has done in a certain game or practice. The number of times that a person's jumping to rebound in basketball, that obviously has stress on their Achilles and on their legs, their quads, their glutes, those kinds of things. How many collisions has somebody had in football one game to the next? Those are things that, again, we can quantify in GPS data, as simple as something like a GPS watch that runners can use or people that are cycling can use, to even data that some of the teams are investing in now. I was just at another meeting talking to another sports program that is now tracking their players with GPS for this very same reason, to get data and to know how much their athletes are being exposed to in a given work day, or in a given training day. And that way they know when their players come to them and say they're fatigued, are they really fatigued, or are they saying that, or now you have data to back it up. Internal load is the body's response. This is a little harder to measure. I'll give you an example later of how we're measuring it at the high school that I work at, but this is the body's response. So this is something called the rate of perceived exertion. So how hard you feel a workout. There's actually some correlation between that and some of these other metrics like heart rate and blood lactate and oxygen consumption. Basically, it's, again, if you have a hard training day, your heart rate's going to go up because your body needs to work very hard to repair those damaged muscles after the workout. It takes some time after you're recovered for the heart rate to come back down. That is a measure of internal load, how recovered you are and how much of that spike in that heart rate did it take, did the training spike that up. As I mentioned, training load, again, is the product of the external and internal load. So it's something like duration times the rate of perceived exertion. And this is of a certain training session. That's why it's SRPE. So duration. So I ran for 50 minutes at, like, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the hardest thing I've ever done, 0 being pretty much laying on the couch. I ran for 50 minutes at a level 8. That's my training load. The number of steps I took, times at the rate of perceived exertion. Sometimes when we have people that are marathon training, we talk about building capacity for the time on their feet. They need to be able to have the ability to run for 4 hours, anywhere from the fastest runners can do it in the 2-hour realm to anywhere from 5 and 6 plus hours. So we have to build that capacity for that time on their feet that they can handle that load. So number of steps or duration, number of time at, how much are you exerting yourself for that amount of time for 6 hours? That is obviously a very substantial load. Again, I mentioned this. Something else I want to mention, because there are some running coaches that are on this and some runners as well. Not all miles are really created equal. So when we think about marathon training or training for any kind of long distance running, any sport that requires that. There's mileage, and that's what we call the external load. So I ran 5 miles today, I ran 20 miles today, whatever that is. If you're training for a marathon, you need to build your capacity to run 26 miles. But only tracking that doesn't really give a complete picture of your fitness. And there's a big push right now in the sports performance and sports medicine literature research to show people that not all the mileage is created equal. So for example, I've coached Fleet Feet's training groups before, and on Tuesdays, we often did one of the following workouts. We either did a nice, easy 4 miles, and we told people we would tell people run at a pace that you can have a conversation at. So that's what we call easy pace. Or we would do 4 miles worth of 800-meter repeats where you're sprinting an 800, and then you do 800 meters again of active recovery, and you're just alternating that for four times. So for 4 miles. Or, another workout that we've done is 1 mile, just nice, easy warm up, then 6 400-meter sprints, and then a 1.5 mile cool down. Or running a trail run that's very hilly, and you can run easy pace, but you're going up and down hills each time. So if you think about all of those, it's 4 miles easy, 4 miles up hills, 4 miles of one kind of sprint, 4 miles of another kind of sprint. All of those runs have a very different effect on how our runners felt the morning after. Oftentimes when we were doing the speed work and the hill work, we would hear about how torn up they were, the day after. And we would always caution people that needs to be a recovery day the day after. So 4 miles of something is completely different than 4 miles of something else. So again, it's the external load of that mileage, but it's also that rating of perceived exertion that you need to take into account. Like, those are 4 hard miles or those were 4 easy miles. And I think we all do this. I think anyone who's worked out before may say like, oh, I did that, but it was really hard. Or our athletes say that all the time. But putting numbers on it and quantifying it makes a huge difference down the line in knowing how to plan your workouts moving forward, or knowing how recovered your athletes are going to be. So again, how do we monitor these things? First, external load. Again, sometimes it's very easy with GPS data. Other things we can monitor when people are in the weight room, I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, is how to use a force plate to measure their force or their power output. There's track fitness tests that we can do to time their speed. We can, again, track acceleration versus with GPS. Or internal load. That session of rating a perceived exertion is kind of an easy one to do. Heart rate, people are wearing heart rate monitors. I'm wearing my Whoop right now that shows my heart rate and tracks my heart rate while I'm sleeping at night to show how I'm recovered and give me a recovery score. Or oxygen consumption. So these are looking at both biological and physiological stressors. Things that you should monitor as a coach, what's specific to your sport? What is specific to your goals that you're trying to train? So maybe we don't need to track mileage. Maybe we need to track speed and acceleration and those kinds of things. What is best for your athletes, but also what's practical for you. This is data made easy here. We'll get into that a little more. The goal, as I mentioned, what's practical and best. The goal here is to be as simple but as informative as possible. So we're using this data for information for coaches, either ourselves or other coaches, athletes, because athletes want to know. They want to know how they're doing. They want to know how they are doing in relative to their teammates or to their competition. They want to know, there's a lot of norms being established for normative data established for these things. I can be able to say to my track runners on their force plate, jumping and landing data, how they stack up to other Division I athletes. So I work at a high school and their goal is to run Division I, and now they have metrics and they have a goal that they want to follow. And then other stakeholders. There's other people involved, which is another topic for another conversation. But when you work in sports, there are directors, there's management, there's administration, and there's other people involved in some of this, the decisions of the success of a team. There's a quote from kind of a well-published sports scientist that says, monitor those things that can answer the questions that coaches and athletes have actually asked for. So what are the things, what are the questions your coaches need during a training session that they're asking about their performance? Like, Why aren't they getting to the ball? Or why do they look like they're just kind of not looking as sharp as they should be on the field? And what can have an impact on the program? Those are the things. We don't need every data point. We really don't. We just need a couple things that are going to help drive our decisions. So how do we think that through? First thing is we need to understand the sport and understand the athlete demands. Again, what do we need to improve? What do they need to get stronger so that they don't get pushed off a ball? Do they need to be able to build their stamina so that they can get from the first quarter to the fourth quarter? What is it? And then again, what ceiling are we looking for? What exactly, I say improve their stamina. What does that mean? Let's objectify that. And then where's the floor? Where are they at now? And where do they have to be? I mentioned that earlier. Step 2 here is what technology, what metrics do you need to measure? This is where you brainstorm. Do we need a force plate to look at their power output? Do we need willingness questionnaires to look at their internal load? Again, I'm going to get into these shortly. Velocity-based training. Do they need GPS tracking to track their distance covered, or how many times they're sprinting in a game or jumping in a game, that kind of thing. I'm going to go in detail about these right now. First off, velocity-based training is a method that, let's say, two completely identical athletes, they have the same strength levels. You have them in the weight room and you want them to lift. So you want them to squat with 80% of their max. One of those athletes really struggled to get there at their 80%, but the other one didn't. They kind of went down and up in the squat, like no big deal. Is the intensity the same for those lifters? The one that really struggled through it and had to really fight for that weight, versus the other one? No, obviously that intensity is not the same. So sometimes when we use, which I mean, I do still use, 80% or 70, I put percentages for their lifts, but then velocity-based training helps to quantify the intensity of it. It kind of helps to figure out the speed of the movement and how they're doing with that movement, and then they can readjust that weight or the exercise. Let me back down on this. Let me back up on this. So that's what velocity-based training is. Force plate testing here is, there's a couple pictures here. We can use it for a couple things. This is just a plate on the ground. It's honestly a fancy bathroom scale that is taking the weight that a person is applying through it at a very, very fast sampling rate. It's every 10,000th of a second, and it's able to show how these change in real time. So we can use it for a couple things. One is athlete profiling, which is a big deal nowadays. So even for people who are trying to go to college, we were worried about how high they can jump, how fast they can run, all those things. This can give basically a test battery for the athlete. How much power are they using? What is their rate of force development? Meaning, how much power are they using and how quickly can they get to that force and power? When you think about track sprinters that need to sprint out of the blocks, or football players that need to produce a lot of force in a short amount of time, the best ones, the most successful athletes, are the ones that are going to be able to put that the most force through the ground, but they also can generate it the fastest too. Because if they don't, they're going to get beat. It doesn't matter how strong they are, they will likely probably get beat to the ball before the point that they can generate their max strength. We can look at vertical jump on it. We can measure that. And again, we can measure explosiveness and we can measure strength. In terms of strength testing, the gold standard for strength testing used to be what we call 1 rep max strength testing. And that's where we have somebody lift, we have them, what's the most that they can do of 1 repetition at a given time. But that takes a lot of time. It can take 30 plus minutes to kind of have them find that weight that they can lift the most of, because if you lift, you can squat one weight and it was easy, we add more weight on and we add more weight on and so forth. There's safety issues with that, because sometimes when somebody's really trying hard and they've got a ton of weight on their back or however they're lifting, you run the risk of injury. So you have to time that of when you want to do that. You don't want to do it before a game. You don't want to do it, at any time where the injury risk, would put them out of a competition. And along those same lines, athletes are very tired and fatigued after that. So they need a few days to recover. So it's hard to know where to put and when to put that into training. I know a lot of other coaches that don't even use it at all for that reason. The force plate actually lets you test that. You can do that middle picture is something called an isometric mid-thigh pull, where you're pulling up against resistance as hard and as fast as you can, you're not moving anything, but the force plate is registering how much force and how much strength you're putting through the ground. It's a test that takes a couple seconds, and you can do it week to week. There's teams that do it multiple times a week because you can track changes within a week, but it can give you an idea of how strong somebody is without having to go through all of the difficulty that a 1-rep max testing does. Something else along those same lines is fatigue monitoring. So if you have somebody jumping and landing or doing that strength test on the force plate and their scores fluctuate from week to week or with day to day within a week, then we know that they're fatigued and we may need to back them down. This is something that we do on Mondays and Tuesdays with our track athletes at the high school that I work at, to look at different changes. We want to see those numbers and those metrics go up as they get to their peak weeks of the season, as they're gearing up for the districts and the state meet, not going down. And we want to make changes before it's too late. The other thing that I use force plates for is asymmetry testing. I use it a lot as a physical therapist. Before I clear somebody to go back to sport, I need to make sure that their force output on one leg is equal to the other side. Or in athletes that we can kind of test for asymmetries and maybe address them before it's too late. Wellness questionnaires. This is, I wonder if, I'm going to see if I can bring this down here so you all can see it. So, whoop, so the screen's not blocking it. Let's try 75. Maybe we're in here. Okay. So this is a way of tracking internal load. So this is just a Google Doc that we send out. There's a couple of these that we send out to our track athletes. So before practice, we want to know how they are. Are they sore? Are they fatigued? How have they done fueling wise? Just a very general nutrition question. How stressed are they and how motivated are they to train? We can get data on this that I can communicate with our coaches of, today might not be a great day in training. Maybe, whatever workout you're going to do, either maybe you should adjust the workout, or maybe we're not going to get our best out of our athletes right now. That being said, from there, we end up getting this preparedness report here, where our athletes, we know their motivation to train, we know their sleep quality, this populates, and again, we can get data that we can show, weekly trends or daily trends on it. Another thing that we do is right after the session, we do this rate of perceived exertion scale, where right when they finish their workout, they often are coming into the weight room right afterwards, just the way that our schedule works at our school, where we have them fill this out just based on immediately after their running session was done. How hard was it all together? How hard was it technically? How hard was it on your lungs? How hard was it on your legs? And then we can kind of get a gauge, and I will adjust their weight room sessions accordingly based on that. Let me play this here. Okay. We have GPS tracking here lastly. And again, I mentioned this earlier, we can anywhere from running, how far did you run and how many miles did you run and what elevation did you do it at? What pace did you do it at? To team sports where, you can look at volume, distance covered, how many times they're sprinting and having to stop, because accelerations and decelerations do contribute a lot to the load on somebody. Think of how many, how the stress on your body is. You have to sprint to a spot, get there and stop. So those are different ways of technology here that you do to kind of track. And again, it's what fits your team, your athletes the best. So once you kind of determine that, step 3 is all the logistics of all this. And this is where it could be difficult, or you can make this easy. How often are you going to track? Are you going to track them every day? Are you going to track them week to week? And that's really based on your goals and what you need to know, and just understanding that what is best for you. And it's going to give you the information that you need to know to drive training in the way that you want it to be. Who are you monitoring? You monitoring everybody? Are you monitoring a subset? When we monitor our track and field team right now, we're only monitoring our upperclassmen. We just feel like they are the ones that are a little bit more responsible right now to be completing those surveys and that data. We also want to make sure when we're doing it that they're more motivated, they're more vested in it. A lot of our runners are either going on to run in college or have goals to run in college. And so these are things that they're going to be exposed to in college. And they need to learn early on to take care of their bodies. This is a lesson I wish I would have learned, back when I was in college. And so we know that they're going to be motivated enough to do this and to follow through. So that's just what works for us. Some people have a whole team that they are going to monitor. It depends. And then what resources do you have? Your time is valuable. You're probably very busy already. I get it. So to have and track data, is that really going to be the best use of your time? Well, it might be, because you do have objective here, objective things that you can work on. However, maybe you just don't have time to do it. There's interns that are we use John Carroll interns at my high school to help out with collecting and sending out surveys and these kinds of things. Or you can always outsource it too. If you really want the data, but you don't have the time to do it and you see the value in it, for example, that's something that I do, can do quarterly or post season or whatever interval testing. Since I have a portable force plate, I've gone to schools to do that and to be able to get data, preseason, again, halfway through the season, or GPS data. There's a local soccer facility that I've been talking with, maybe monitoring their load and their player load, because I can get their GPS data and I can look at it remotely and then I can make decisions. And communicate with the coaches before their practices so they know what's going on. So again, it's not something that you may necessarily have to spend all that time doing, but you can find a way to kind of make it work for you. I just want to close with one thing. This is Dawn Scott, who is the former high performance coach for the U.S. women's soccer when they won the World Cup, the last World Cup. She has been, a lot of the players and the coaches will say that she was an integral part of their success, part of the reason that they won. And she has this quote about it's data, and it's data that you have to look at, and data that you have to continue to study, but at the same time, it's an art and a science. So, there's a relationship with your players or with your athletes, and knowing your coaching staff or knowing your athletes. The data is very important, but you can't live and die by the data. Again, it can make your training better, but we can't be so black and white about it. One other thing, just understanding other physical qualities of people that also can take into effective training loads. I'll just kind of leave this up here as a reference. And I appreciate your time today, and look forward to doing more of these. So feel free to stay in touch and stay tuned of what's coming up. And I appreciate it. We'll take questions. I'm gonna pause this here and take the recording off, and we will take questions if I can.